Um, but the 8-week things, half that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you have the 60, excellent. That'd be great.
Perfect.
Sweet.
Yeah. I'm only trying to get most of my stuff online for next semester just because I put in for Cherokee Nation's CLMAT program. If I get accepted, then I have to do mostly online for a little while. If I don't get it, then I'm going to try to get into one of your actual in-person classes.
Cool.
I will see you next Monday, Dr. Harrison.
All right. See you then. Now in methods. And so today what we're going to do is play with some stuff. And then, because I wanted to be able to show you some of the stuff in surveys and how those work, complement the chapter that we're in, and also to help develop out your guys' thoughts. Because what you'll see is in developing the survey, your understanding for how these numbers work and how we can play with them change a little bit. But I didn't get enough time yesterday. It's like between good golly, like work stuff, having to go in, stand in that line and vote stuff, and then doctor appointments and that kind of thing. It's like, oh, giving time for it. And so I'll have to do that over the next couple days, and then we'll come in on Monday and talk about future corrections for you as individuals if you want to, or like in mass. And then if you guys want to sit down to talk about, hey, this is an idea I like, I'm running with, that kind of thing. But I'll give you more details about that next time, because I got some pretty cool thoughts to put them out for you all that I think you'll like. But we'll see. I'll put it up to. I might do it democratic since we just had elections. Though. See how you guys want to do it. Because that'll be fun. Because it'll also be a bit of a survey of its own, right? And so we can do that a little bit. Get you guys playing with it. All right. So we were in methods. We got about 6 minutes. And all. We need to finish all this coffee and get water. Methods. And all right, so here I should have, so for today, I'm showing you some, it's not my password, it doesn't update it. Cool. All right, that should get me in there. Downloads. Let's see. Was Frank's Field? Was that this book? Yeah. Okay, cool. So here's where they talk about surveys. So we'll talk about survey formats. I'll show you some survey stuff. And I'll show you simple, complex, and flow, that kind of stuff. First, I'm going to go get some water.
Your sweater's cute. Thank you. I know it's past Halloween, but
Disconnected. All right, mail's coming. Nope. Hey, how's it going? All right, so we got 3 minutes. For shame. No paper?
left my laptop at my grandma's house.
Ah,
Now I feel.
that's worse. No, I don't know if that's worse than. Yeah, not quite as bad as leaving one's phone somewhere.
That,
That's not my. Ooh, I forgot one other thing that took me so much time last night. I've got to turn in my laptop today to IT services. So I don't know exactly how that's going to go because I had to take all of my files off of it because apparently it's one of those times you give it back, they give you one kind of thing to do the exchanges.
oh,
And so I had to duplicate all of the files on my laptop to move them into Google Drive to be able to move them to the new computer whenever I get it. That was what, 16,000 files last night. Yeah, that was fun. Only was it 48 of them didn't make it. So I actually had to go through and analyze that and look at it. Like, okay, were any of those of consequence? Looks like not though. So hey, my goodness, it isn't always something. All right, so we have 2 minutes left. I don't think we have anything there. I think I downloaded it here already. Where did I put that? Right here. Without data. No. No. Yeah, start browsing already. Okay, so I need to do the following with y'all. Share screen. Share screen. That is the right screen. Okay. I'm actually off screen. I might move over because I'm gonna be sitting at the computer a lot today because I'm gonna be showing you stuff. And let's see if I can move this the right way. Boom, there's me. Hey, we will move this out a little. Now we'll keep it in a little bit. And if I need to, what I will do is I'll move the camera over to whiteboard if we need to talk about stuff over there. There'll probably be a few points where I need to do that. Okay. It is officially 11 o'clock. Show me everybody in the room. Okay. Chat, so I can see that if anybody needs to chat. And if you put anything in the chat, no one responds or anything like that, because I have a hard time seeing it because it is, what is that, like 20, 30 feet away, something like that. And they don't make the font any bigger. So it's pretty hard to read. So if anybody's on there and I don't say anything about it, go ahead and sound off because I do want you guys to talk. I think I had that issue, was it last class or maybe the class before, where somebody had asked a question in the chat. I couldn't see it at all. And it wasn't until I was leaving I saw someone say something about it and I saw it in the chat and I was like, yeah, I missed that entirely. So make sure if you got something in there and you want to say something or it's not being answered, just go ahead and sound off because that I might need that because I have trouble seeing that far. Okay. First thing I need to do is see what's been moved over here. So you may remember I've showed you a little bit about desktop.nsuk.edu. So this is that remote desktop. I've got that pulled up, and I have a few, a few data sets in here, a few Excel files. I'm going to move a few things over here as well because there's some other things I want to show you about NSUK.edu. And so you'd log into this just like you would any other computer. In terms of memory, sometimes this will save the files you've downloaded. Every now and again, it will wipe those out though. And I don't know quite the regularity to it. I know every now and again, it'll be like, at least on, I think it's an annual basis, they have to go and recertify licenses for programs. And that's kind of one of those times where you'll see files you had on there will disappear. And so be coming back like, you can't leave it like a place to put files to trust because you never know if it's going to come back into it and those files aren't there anymore. So always move them between like your email if you use this. So that way you've got a copy of it. That's actually one of the biggest lessons I have for all of you. For any long lesson or any long works that you do, like if it's a term paper in a class, even if it's just like 5 pages, Keep at least 2 copies of it, ideally 3. Just keep one on your computer, one maybe in your email, so that way it's on the cloud kind of thing, and maybe one like on a USB drive or somewhere else. So that way, if something happens, you don't have to go all the way back out to the very first stage of I've got to go get data, right? Because I've had friends who got really far into their degrees who had stuff like that happen. I knew someone who was, what were they? They were past the data set collection. They didn't lose their data set, but they'd written all their written work for their dissertation. Computer crashed, lost an entire year of their life. Entire year just over computer crash because they didn't have a duplicate somewhere, right? So as you start playing with stuff, if it's something that really matters to you, make sure you save it in a couple places so you always avoid that. Huge, huge thing, whether that's schoolwork, work, life stuff, doesn't really matter, just a good practice to have. Let's see. Pop that in here. All right, so I'm up here now. Boom. So I think that will get me in. Of course, you want to send me a text message. Got it. Yeah, save it. Trust this device. Go ahead, give me a text message. And because it's a remote desktop, there's a lot of times we have to do this. It doesn't have a physical location like you may have on your computer. Would you log in, please? Okay. Now we should be in. Email. From me to me as an attachment. And so this will be a big long list of stuff. Here we go. So I'm going to show you my survey, the one I put together. We're going to talk about it in general first. So I'll give you a situation where this is what I kind of faced. No. Right now we can actually stop this and I can move over to the board for a second. Boop. Boop. Here. Okay, now the last slide, ready? Okay, so basically what happened was I worked at a university that had an issue with crime. There were a couple of high profile incidences that happened within the last 10 years of the survey that I put together. That's actually the second survey I put together for them. Wasn't the only one putting together the first one. I was the only one putting this one together. So much more detail. Basically what happened was, what was it? One high profile was campus shooting, basically drug deal, gone bad. Student knew they were going to deal with someone who was potentially dangerous. So I'm going to bring them on campus because there's police here, so it's a safer environment. I'll be okay. That's not how that math works. Just to be clear, it's like if you're dealing with a dangerous person, doesn't matter where you're at, right? That's why correction officers have so much stress. You know, there's some dangerous people here. There's always that danger there. It doesn't go away, no matter what environment you put them into, right? And so one of those was in response to that. The second one, third, so I was involved in 2 and 3. Second one was related to a student who was abducted and murdered. Abducted, raped, and murdered. That was in broad daylight. Right? And so fear was one of those things that became pretty poignant matter because it's like, here we are, it's broad daylight, it's 9 a.m. Person parks in the parking lot right across the street. Before they make it to the building across the street, they're gone. You find them 3 days later, 4 days later, dead in, was it a lake or a pond or something like that? Like horrible situation. So we need to figure out exactly what's going on. We got an issue, crime. We got an issue with fear. So crime is pretty straightforward. We track that to some degree. We can also get some stuff on the unofficial side. If we're dealing with crime, I said, we have some official counts. Where would we look for that?
Like NIBRS and UCR?
Yeah, UCR, NIBRS can get some stuff. If you're on the campus environment, they actually have, they call it the gene clearing safety reporting structure. Every year they have to publish out their numbers related to crimes. It's actually named after a student in the is that 80s, 70s. Basically what happened there was university's major failing led to a student's death. I can't remember the name of the university, but what happened was student dormitory, I think it was a female dormitory exclusively, security issues, inability to lock doors, someone breaks in, murders a student in their sleep, right? And known issue left unaddressed, he let it happen. And so that's one of the reasons for the campus safety stats is so people can assess it. Most people don't. They just kind of pick their subject areas or wherever's applicable and go from there. But that's the general idea for that. So you got these numbers here, right? What kinds of numbers were those again? Things I want you to think about anytime you're moving into these spheres, okay? You have those concepts that you deal with, right? Here are the different topics. You have the concepts you're dealing with, right? The different subjects, variables. Your dependent variables, your why. Your independent variable, all the things you think are affect why. Those effects are those propositions, those relationships. We expect strain to increase as work conditions decrease. Right? We're gonna go through and specify. Okay, strain meaning some type of negative emotional state. We'll use a scale to kind of assess. When we talk about work resources, we're going to start talking about things like departmental budget or administrative support or any number of things like that. And you start to establish, okay, here's what those are. We can measure those things. And now we can try to see if those measurements change in similar ways or different ways, people, as you move across different categories or units, right? And so we start thinking about relationships between your things. The big things for you to always think about if you're doing quantitative stuff is you'll have whatever variable you're dealing with. When you run the analysis, it's going to give you numbers, significance, and direction, right? The first thing we talked about when we were talking about like measures of central tendency, talk about univariate measures, so one variable. As we start building to this, we start getting into relationships, right? As we start looking at those relationships, what we look at are the nature of those relationships. And largely we talk about it in these three ways. Is it significant? Does it actually matter? Right? That's all that means. Bunch of tests to do that, to say that these differences that we see here are significant. If we remove this variable from the equation, or if we add this variable into the equation, it has a significant effect. If we take it away, we're going to be missing something because that effect's gone. If you're looking at a correlation, that the correlation actually matters. As this thing goes up or goes down, this other one does too, and it actually tracks, right? That significance is an important aspect of it. Direction's the next one because that's going to tell you what it does, right? As this thing gets better, this other thing gets worse. That's called the inverse relationship, right? As we'll get good. as the amount of income you have increases, the difficulty in managing that income also decreases. Wait a second. That's one that's going to look like this, right? The more money you have, the more difficult it's going to be to manage. Also, on the other end, you have no money, it's really difficult to manage that too. Right? So depending on how you measure it, pick up both sides of that, you're going to see nothing because it's going to balance out. So you have to be very careful with how you set these things up. Right? So you have to know the positives and the negatives from the get-go. You can kind of do that through logic. What ways would be expected? Right? What some of the math does, though, if we start getting like progressions, this is much further out than what we'll get in this semester. But they'll give you how much of an effect one of those variables has, right? So if we saw a 1 unit increase in this, will be met with this size of increase in your y. Should everything else be held the same, right? And so you start identifying something. Here's how relationships work. Does it matter? What direction does it go? How strong or how big is that relationship? Its magnitude. It's a basic framework for understanding how relationships can exist, right? Positive, negative, neutral, no relationship. Is it significant? Is it sizable? Using that kind of a framework, you can start to place in how you would think these things plug in together, right? So we're interested in fear and crime and those types of things, right? So how would you start out measuring fear? And crime's pretty easy. We've got a structure already in place for that. Crime incidents types, crime incidents reports. Those things are even tracked for you to some degree. That's pretty easy. This thing isn't. If I'm concerned about people's fear levels, what am I concerned about? Unknown, right? And so that's part of that conceptual sides of things. You'll get it to some degree in lit reviews. You'll get it to some degree in methodology, right? Because a literature review for any article you read, they'll follow the same kind of process, the same kind of sections as what you do for any of these works, where it's here's your introduction, here's a lit review, and then it moves into methodology. So they'll tell you, here's what the problem is. They'll go a little bit more detail. Here's what these concepts mean. In this case, here's what fear means to everybody else. And in that next section, here's what it is here in this bit of research. And so if you're watching it, you're tracking, you can see, okay, big problem. Here's what it is specifically. Here's how they're addressing it. So you get a few different ways to kind of look at it. Right? As you delve into the research on these things, you'll see that they're kind of messy, right? In your classes, we've had to do literature reviews because you haven't had to do one in here. You won't have to do one in here. Have you found it wasn't quite clear what it was the person was talking about? You had any of those instances? Yeah, we've had to write a paper and it's like, what the hell am I actually reading here? Yeah, this one was rife with that. Why? What is it when we talk about fear that we're actually talking about was the question. They spent like 6 decades, actually probably more like 3 really kind of a framework for it. But we're talking about fear. You delve into the research. If you look at the methodology side, there's like one question that is present. Right? There's variations of it, but it's really just one question. It's something along the lines of, this is the most common one. How afraid are you? Hope I spelled it correctly. In your neighborhood. That's fresh handwriting. That is the most common question for fear. How afraid are you when walking in your neighborhood? That's gonna be a lighter item where it's gonna be something like very afraid to very unafraid, and however many points you want to put in there can range from 2, 3, 4, 5, however many. Right? Problem is when you start dealing with, okay, on the methodology side, we're saying it's this. In other bits, the conceptual side, they're saying that this question, what are we asking here? How afraid are you when walking in your neighborhood? Ooh, that part. At night. Is that a good way to determine how fearful people are? I don't know. Okay. When you guys are here for a night class and you have to walk to your car afterwards, how do you feel? Comfortable? Nothing?
I'm afraid.
You're afraid. Carrying weapons?
I have like my keys and I'll put them in like each one of my hands or whatever, but
Yeah.
I don't necessarily like bring a knife or anything, which I should have.
Love knives. Messy weapons. Really quiet, real messy. Yeah. Well, it's like, what are you dealing with there? That's actually in this literature too. But yeah, there's something to this, right? And there's something to that other part too. Like this thing right here has got a knife on it. 11. We don't have good claws. We don't have very good teeth. Most of them are rounded. They break pretty easy too. Yeah. A heavy weapon's a much better way to deal with that. Is there real danger there? Maybe. Right? So danger is going to be one of those elements under it. Okay. What exactly are we talking about? We're talking about this feeling in some type of performative thing, right? This is you as you're walking through your neighborhood. Okay. Is it you that we're measuring, or is it the neighborhood? I don't know. Right? It's one of those things like, ooh, what was it? It was a conversation I had with someone about bias. It's like anytime you learn something, how much is it you're learning? What's being taught or your interpretation of it? Like how much of it is it you're seeing the world objectively, or how much is your subjective you coming through? Right? Those aren't easy things to manage. Here you got your neighborhood, one context. At night, different context. You are in an action. That's another context added to it. And are we really even talking about you? Has been a question of this phrase. It's the most common one. It's still used, right? They still use this one. What are we talking about here? Is it you're afraid in general? This is your home environment in the most maximal situation where you should have fear in general. That's one understanding. 2, this is really more a measure of your neighborhood and how safe you are when you're there, because you're not always just found in your neighborhood or at night. That's 2. 3, it's really a reflection of the overall concern for crime in your area. It's 4, that's something completely different, right? Now you're looking at it as in, yeah, it's a concern for me as I'm walking, but is it really fear, or is it that it's a real problem, or it's a perceived problem? It's different things. Is it this, or is it really the fact that I'm afraid while walking at night? It's not really that I'm afraid for me. It doesn't specify that I'm afraid for me. It just specifies that I'm afraid. I'm actually afraid for someone else. I'm walking with my little kid. It's really busy. There's a lot of traffic in here. I'm worried the kid's going to get run over. Terrified. Not the same thing. Right? And so you have to be very, very careful with how you set these things up. So the right intent is inferred as you do it without biasing it. That's a hell of a middle ground right there. Because we know that just question ordering and the words themselves. Where this one sits right now is it's somewhere between these things. And so as we deal with that, we'll start breaking it out and you'll see how it works. Right? So motion, cognition, behavior. Right? So if you break out fear into its basic elements, which you'll find across lots of research, different frameworks for it, what it starts to look like on the aggregate there, because you have to do kind of the numbers there if you're reading the articles. Emotion and cognition are the two biggest aspects of it in terms of what's going on with people. Emotion is going to be a short-term thing as you're literally walking into that parking lot, right? That cognition thing is separate from that. You can know that it's coming, right? These two things can lead here. But also, this thing's going to be out in front of these things, too. If you have an emotional reaction, it's going to affect your future cognition, too. So it's a spider web, is what it is. It's a spider web of things. And so we have to figure out how to draw these distinctions here and put them in order so we can determine what exactly is going on. That's not easy, right? So we're going to forego this one because it's a survey. An emotional response. Why would we forego that? Too temporally bound, right? If you really get into that emotional response, that's while you're actively in that situation. The only time you could really get that accurately is if you're in it, right? Otherwise, you're right back over here. This is my perception of what I had encountered. This thing right here, this is the perception of how much risk or danger I think is in a given situation. That's that walking in the parking lot at night, right? As I envision that, I'm going to fill in the details that aren't specified with things that I know, and that's going to give me an idea of how dangerous that is. Okay, so this one's a bit different. This is one you kind of look at for surveys. This is one people say they look at it, but there's still arguments whether or not that question, this, or something else, right? And then you have all the stuff you can ask about people's behaviors. So we're going to skip this one, this cognitive one. What kind of question did you think I asked? How safe do you feel? How afraid do you feel? Simple word change. That's going to be perceptions that you're trying to cast a more positive image of it, right? If I pull this up over here, I think it's in here. Dissertation syntax. I grab the actual dissertation. Oh, that's funny. I thought I had. Who just popped in? That's going to be over here, right here. So what I did is I used that framework, that same type of question. But instead of it being bound to your neighborhood at night, we're not or night. So I broke those parts out. Yeah. And so let's see here. No. I spelled it correctly. Got the line in there. Let's see here. From me to me. Good golly, this is going to be way down in here somewhere. There's a PowerPoint for it. Ready to impute. There's abstracts. Good golly. I thought I had that in here already. Apparently I didn't. I'll have to get that for you and show you that one if I can't find it right here. Let's see. Who's someone else I would have sent it to? Oh, here we go. Hold on. Boom, boom, boom. There we go. Download. Connect it again. Open file. So when we talk about survey developments and that kind of stuff, this is old. I need to jump to page, wrong window. Wrong one. Right here. Boom. 128. Wrong thing. One. Okay. Beginning of a survey. Right here, if I'm not sharing that, I'll go ahead and show it so you guys can see it a little bit closer. It's going to be over here, over here. Boom. Okay. Of course, it's got this little title here because it starts out with demographics. Dear so-and-so, here's a description of it. Right. Here's the topic of it. Here's what's going to be asked of you. This one actually had some incentives in there. Participation, confidentiality. You agree? Continue. Right. And so with that, you have informed consent, those types of things. And we talked about that before. You need to have people who are aware of what they're consenting to, that they know whether or not it's anonymous or confidential, those types of things. So you start out with that, jumps right into demographics, right? As you're looking at this is something that you've seen before, right? Those types of surveys. Yes. Okay. So here's what it looks like when you start getting the data. This one I should have in here. Yep, dedupe. Boom. And fine. So I think I mentioned this last class. I think it was towards the end where I started talking about like your demographics and those types of things tend to be your controls. So there's a bit of a toss up whether or not you want those at the beginning or at the end. Because if you have them at the beginning, sometimes that will turn people off from taking your survey, right? Because same survey I've had 100,000 times. I don't want to get this click, right? The other end of the spectrum, if you start with your topical area first, that can be something that draws people's attention and really gets them involved. It just is one of those, it's kind of decision to be made. The problem is there, if you put them at the end, people who bow out, you lose this right off the bat. That might be useful to have that information. Okay, so we've got age, sex, race, ethnicity, those types of things, right? So we've got this aspect you're going to focus in on and that behavior element, because I'm going to tell you how we get into that in a second. Start with controls. What kinds of controls do you think that we need? Yeah, a couple of them right there. Age, sex, race. Okay, we're dealing with on-campus populations. How can you divide people? We talked a little bit about that last time. Employment status is a good one, right? First, you have in terms of on versus off, and then you have in terms of what kinds of employment we're talking about. We're talking about like student workers, full-time employees. We're talking about faculty versus staff. We're talking about no, police officers. What are we talking about? This is all different things, right? How much of that do we need to capture? Becomes something you need to consider. Another thing that might be useful, right? What are we dealing with? Fear, right? What else are we dealing with? Crime. You said before those are official numbers, so what else do you need to capture? down here. Yeah. Yeah, so you need your victimization questions, right? That's gonna throw off somebody's fear levels. What other things are gonna affect their fear levels? Okay. Let's think about that. So if I personally am a victim, we would expect that to have an effect. Why would we expect crime itself to have an effect? I mean, beyond victimization. Because if we have a measure for their victimization, if we want to look at crime relationship, we can. Why would we expect there to be a link here if we're already accounting for this? It's that logic and reasoning stuff. So start thinking about each of these relationships, and all the potential things that can take place here. This one's a little bit different because it's a different perspective on it. You have to look at, well, like what I said with that fear thing, sometimes people aren't necessarily afraid of what? Sometimes it's their own victimization. Sometimes it's this one. Vicarious. What does that phrase mean? Ooh,
Through something like.
that's how I live. Yes. Vicarious. Yes. I know 3 people who've had their car broken into in that parking lot. I don't really want to go out there. Someone's breaking into it. They're going to be out there at some point in time, and it's dark and I can't see. Yeah. I'm not going to be very happy going out there. Right. So you can start seeing it's like, okay, how many different things, how many different places can something affect fear? And it's like, it's everything from, the things that you personally encountered to the people that you know and that they've encountered, from what you hear about may be going on officially or unofficially, right? That known versus unknown. That's what I mean. Ooh, well, we're doing known versus unknown. What effect does the unknown have on fear? Yeah. Um, um, who was it that said the only thing we had to fear is fear itself? What is it that they're saying there? It's that response to some degree, but what is it that does? The unknown is one of those things that tends to be a large cause of fear, right? I usually whenever I use this phrase in this environment, usually think about academic tenure. That's not what I mean. I mean, as in time, as in how long has this person been associated with this environment? Your knowledge massively changes with the length of time that you're entrenched, I guess would be a good way to say it. The time that you're involved in that area, you become more familiar with what are and what are not believed to be risks. Sometimes those risks are real, right? So that's part of the distinction. So if we're trying to figure out how fear is manifested in these places, there's all kinds of ways to come at this. All different ways you can attack this. You can look at this from like conceptual sides, figuring out what parts you want to focus in on. That's pretty early in the development process. To really, once you have it set up, what order you want to set these things up, what things need to be tested. For example, if I want to get into in your neighborhood at night, what are we talking about there? We're talking about locations and time, right? You have a closed environment. As you start looking at it, So here's where it starts getting into the different, yeah, I'm still sharing the screen. Good. So sex, male, female, age in years. There's a number of ways you can do age. I just did that for simplicity. Race, ethnicity, marital status, student. Yes, no, what kind? Classification. This right here. That question. As you're setting these things up, you have everything related to the flow of the concepts you're going to be dealing with. You also have everything related to the flow in which people see things. This question will only come up if they selected that they're a student, right? You can do that a lot. So this thing will be really long because this thing will show all possible questions, not the questions that people get, right? I think it said something like 30 to 45 minutes. It could be 30 minutes. I had one person that took like 4 hours. Why? Because they got every single contingency question there was because they were lying. They got kicked out, right? No one is a victim to every single type of crime ever possible in a 6-month period kind of thing. It's like that one was false because it was both on and off campus. That's a lot, right? And so there's some cleaning element to it too that'll come in later. All right, so those questions right there. This university, my online, person. Why would you want to know the online versus in person? Are you really here? Right? Is this a valid perception? Is this a perception that you're just basing it off of whatever? Right? Here. When are your courses? What is your primary field? Here's an interesting one. Why would your field matter? Would it? Where are you going to be on campus? What buildings? Right? And so you start to see how these things stack up. That's why they say multiple measures are the best measures. If you have multiple measures, you can start to check these things, see if they overlap. You said your primary field of study is biology. But here you said you never use the actual biology building and you're an in-person student. Like, okay. If I see that, I'm going to be a little bit curious as to what's going on there, right? Is that going to be a pattern that I see repeatedly through this data set? Or is that going to be an exceptional thing where I think that they might not be completely honest, right? That might be something that's kicked out. Don't know. It depends on how I want to handle it. Time frames here, how long you've been enrolled, same kinds of things for an employee. Are you an employee or different types? How many years? Where do you live? Where do you rent if you rent? How far are you? Right? Why is that? That whole perceptions thing. Closer tied in you are. Ideally, the more accurate it is. Is that the case? Those are all questions to ask. Okay. This side makes a lot of sense. What you'll see on the other side. So if I go to, oh, here's where I did some baselines for walking. Are you actually walking on campus? Right? How safe do you feel if walking in these time periods? Right? Daytime's different than nighttime. When are you actually most likely to have crimes take place? Daytime. Or is everybody most afraid? Nighttime. Like it's one of those things. They're interesting dichotomies, right? Contradictions. When I feel safest, so not only do you see how safe you feel, here's the relative between when you see the least safe environment. So you got the other side too. So you can literally balance these things out. What you end up with is the opportunity to a little bit to set your baselines. What's your baseline here? Are we looking at, okay, as I'm looking at this university environment, I have a measure for how safe they feel about the university overall. I also have measures for how they feel about the university overall across morning, day, afternoon, night. I also have measures for every specific building that they gave me information on. That's why this thing's so long, because you'll see here. Parking lots, which ones do you use? Here's a map, right? Are there ones you avoid? If yes, tell me which ones, right? Buildings, which ones do you use? Do you avoid them? Which ones? Right? Now, here's where it gets into perceptions. Campus itself, very safe to very unsafe. Opinion about changes in the past year. Good to bad. Surrounding neighborhoods, same kind of thing. Very safe to unsafe. My opinion about the safety in the neighborhood over time. Is it getting better or worse? So now you've got time measures a little bit. You have relative ones related to the neighborhood surrounding it and the campus. So there's all kinds of information between those two measures you can pull out. It's not just those measures, it's those relationships between. Best thing is since they're relatively consistent, neither changing only like location or time, those are the same kinds of units, right? What are we talking about? A 5-point scale using the same answer, same responses? You're dealing with this, it's gonna be similar in its nature to some degree. If it's dealing with the same topic, you can use math to play with those things. So you've got ways to check to see if you're getting consistency, and you've got ways to see if those changes actually matter across those different, how would you say, different formulas you could use, the different mathematics you could use between those concepts, right? Because you could say, this is your baseline. I'm going to subtract this one from this to get the increase or the decrease in fear for this specific location or for the university itself in any specific time frame. So it literally becomes something you can start measuring out and treating like it's a number, even though you're dealing with people's perceptions about how safe they are, right? You got one thing that's relatively abstract that we've now created a numerical system to analyze. If I come over here to those numbers, what you'll see. Okay. Go show you the variable view. The labels actually have what the questions were, right? It'll tell you the classification for this type of data. It's a number, right? So now it knows how to treat those numbers. If I go all the way over to the end, it'll tell you how it's treating those numbers as a scale. So that's going to be that interval or that ratio level. It's not just order. It's not a name. That's one it's treating like a scale, right? What that means is it will give you options there that may not apply. Because if you look at this, sex, here's your options. 1, 2, or 3. Male, female, other, right? There's no relationship between those. 2 males don't make a female and a female and male don't make an other. That's not that math. These are just categories. So I should really go over there and change that back to nominal because there's no distinction between these things. Don't necessarily have to because there's numbers there you can play with it. If you're going to run it though, 1, 2, 3. Not necessarily how you want to have it, right? Because depending on what your numbers are, one of those groups might not have any real, might not be analyzable. All right, let's see here. Frequencies. Boom. That's going to be Q10. Oh, it's showing me names. Q10. Boom. Right? Look. 257, 587, 5. I can't use that group. That group's too small. So I lost 5 people right there. Okay. Next step, I actually want to analyze it and do something with it. First thing I'm going to have to do is I'm actually going to have to change those numbers. I'm going to take this, I'm going to recode it. I'm going to grab 10. And now we're going to call it, we'll say, it's just going to be called sex, male, female. Change, it's going to change this one into sex, and it will let you specify. Okay, so we had value 1, that was male. We're going to make that, you want that to be 0 or 1? 1. Okay, it's 1. Add. Okay. 2 is now going to be 0. Add. 3 will be system missing. Add. So that way they don't pop into your analyses. Continue from there. If you paste it, it'll give you this language right here. This is like literally pressing the play button on a song. You do that, it runs it. And when you come over here, this is that variable view where it tells you about the variables. You scroll all the way down to the bottom. If it moves very fast. It keeps disconnecting. There you go. There it is right there. Okay. Ones and zeros. If I analyze descriptives on this, boom. Next one. Oh, wait. Okay. That group is gone. It says 0 versus 1 rather than male and female, and they reversed orders, right? So depending on how you want to analyze this and what your variable, your attribute, let's say, of consequence is, you can change the nature of all of your sentences by changing whether this is 0 and 1 for male or 0 and 1 for female, right? Depending on the topic that you're interested in, one of those would be better than the other. For example, if you're looking at, let's say we're dealing with fear, right? I'm wanting to pull out the fact that generally females tend to have higher fear levels. I would want them to be a 1 because that's going to be a positive indication showing that, yes, as the number of females increase, the level of fear would also increase in a group, right? It tells me the exact same thing though if I flip it over and reverse it the other way. It's one of those that that's a decision point that has some bearing on it in its presentation, but the actual knowledge there, it doesn't. And so you can kind of see where you've got that knowledge, that truth that you're getting at, but there's also that element of presentation, applicability, and consumption. You'll have to balance out as you go. And so it's always something that's recursive and messy. That's the point of today. Look at all that. That's messy. What you see there, though, is as we set up a structure, whether it's something like this, where it's kind of more rigid than what we're usually used to, because I'm literally in high detail, specific locations. You start looking at that. We can chart out there. Think about it. I've got the locations that people say that they're afraid of. I've got the ones that they say they use and avoid, right? I've got the overall measures for campus. Between those things, what can you start to put together? Well, one of the ones that was most consequential for me to look at the beginning was, all right, I can't tell you. No, I'm just kidding. I'll finish that thought. Okay. Choice, right? That fear element has a big part of choice. If I have to go into some place where I have no choice, but I know there's danger there, and I have to do it anyway, fear levels might increase. If you have the ability to avoid a location, great, you will in general. But what happens if it's an avoid location you can't avoid? You have to go there for work, right? So you can start to see, can we test to see if there's places where there's a significant relationship? You start seeing a spike in that fear just related to those things across multiple people, meaning it's probably more likely to be valid. And then you could overlap it with the crime and say, hey, is that something that matches with those crime statistics, or is there something else going on there we might need to look a little bit farther into? And just take off from there. Okay. Have fun with that. We'll pick up with those thoughts next time, and what we'll do is I'll finally be able to revisit that assignment and identify those frameworks for the ideas that you guys had. I wanted to do it today or last night, but I was moving files. I'd forgotten. Fun stuff. With that, you guys have any questions? No? All right. Well, we'll pick up there next time. Have a great day, a great weekend. Adios. This and the share screen, and I'll see you all later.